As we get started, and part of the discussion has been that as we move forward with the Sunday mornings, the lessons ahead, that one of the first ones that we're going to dive into is the first chapter of Psalms, specifically the first couple verses. And with that, in reading through introduction into Psalms, it was interesting to see how they laid it out, how Psalms is not different than the hymnals that we have, where it's broken into different sections and corresponded to other scriptures and parts of worship. However, what was really interesting about Psalms 1, it's short, it's just 6 verses, but it really is, from start to finish, matches throughout a general theme throughout the Bible. And this morning, Cooper's going to go ahead and read the first part of the book, chapters for us, and read that.
I'll read Psalm 1, 1 through 6. How blessed is the man who does not walk in the counsel of the wicked, nor stand in the path of sinners, nor sit in the seat of scoffers. But his delight is in the law of the Lord. And he will be like a tree, firmly planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in its season, and its leaf does not wither, and in whatever he does he prospers. The wicked are not so, but they are like chaff, which the wind drives away. Therefore the wicked will not stand in the judgment, nor sinners will assembly in the righteous. For the Lord knows the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked will perish.
Thanks, Bud. So, a different way of thinking about and kind of going with this is that, if you ever notice that in all children's fairy tales, the stories, everything kind of has the same basic theme. We have the good guys, the bad guys, and then the final ending, everybody lived happily ever after. So we have Cinderella. She comes down the stairs, the Duke's down there, everybody's tried to shove their foot in the glass slipper, and depending on which version you watch, listen to, book, but she finally gets down there, gets her foot in the slipper. The Duke's like, aha, found the run. She's like, yes, it's me, it's mine. And off she goes, marries the prince, the mice move in, all the other animals, what it not, and they live happily ever after. And we've got Snow White. Nobody can wake her up. She's out in her coma. Then miraculously, the prince kisses her and poof, she wakes up, leaves the dwarfs alone, and everybody, off they go, and he marries her, and happily ever after again. So why this reoccurring theme of happily ever after? It's what everybody desires, this let's live happily ever after. And, from childbirth till the end of life, that's what we've been thinking about. What we're expecting to experience in the life that we live is happily ever after. Even so much that as we think about, even in our founding documents, July 4th, 1776, Declaration of Independence, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So why is this self-evident? How obvious is it? Well, if we think about it and look at it from a biblical sense, it's very obvious. In the very beginning it starts, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them, and then he blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. Have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, over every living thing that moves on earth. So from the very beginning, God's command is to be fruitful, be blessed, and it is, yes, he's giving a command, but he's giving it in a sense that he is asking and providing for a blessing to them. And this continues all the way to the end. In Revelations, first chapter of Revelations, blessed is he who reads and those who hear the words of this prophecy and keep these things which are written in it, for the time is near. And in the last chapter, chapter 22, behold, I am coming quickly. Blessed is he who keeps the words of the prophecy of this book. So it's God's desire to bless us from start to finish. Go back to Psalms 1. Psalms 1, verse 1, blessed is he. And in verse 2, in his delight. He's talking about man's delight. You know, we are delighting in living in his law. And how we meditate in that from day to day. And this continues on, and it's not just it's a general theme, but it's also the very first lesson and sermon that Jesus taught. What were those words? Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So starting right there, being blessed and how we are in Matthew 5:3. And then the last of the Beatitudes there in 5:10 of Matthew, blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of God. So throughout that, even in the very beginning of the New Testament, how as the law and the commandments are being brought to us, it is about the blessedness that we are to have and that reward of the kingdom. So blessedness, happiness, this godly prosperity, life, joy. This is that satisfaction that God is providing and wants us and each one of us to have. But I know each of us, the human in us, the flesh in us is going, well, I'm not seeing this blessedness. I'm not happy today. I've had torment. I've had perils. All the distractions that happen to us on each and every day. I mean, I'm not being able to live happily all day, ever after. But we're thinking about and talking about two different things here. There's that earthly living happily ever after and living happily in the ever after life. And that is that blessing that he's providing us to be prepared and blessing us to be happy in our life ever after, in that kingdom of heaven that he provides. So Psalms 1 isn't a fairy tale, it's the truth. It's the truth that there is a happily ever after life. And there are some truths to that, some very basic truths that are very simply laid out in here. The first of those is there's two kinds of people. So we have the godly, the righteous man, and we have the other, the ungodly, the cursed, the sinner. And in God's sight, there are just these two types. It's trying to lay it out very simply. And too often, though, as human in the flesh, we tend to categorize people and do the same, put people into categories. We've got the rich and the poor, the young and the old, educated, uneducated, country, the city, urban and suburban, male, female, Democrat, citizen, foreigners. But God looks at everything from the spiritual, the moral, those eternal things where man's wisdom is based on those that are visible, the tangible, the temporal things. And we see these two categories highlighted throughout. So in Matthew 25, 31 and 32, when the Son of Man comes in his glory, all the angels with him, he will sit at his glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate one from another as a shepherd does from the sheep to the goats, separating these two categories. Likewise, in Matthew 13, 24 through 30, the kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while he slept, his enemy came and showed tares among them, among the wheat and went his way. But when the grain had sprouted and produced a crop, when the tares also appeared, so the servants of the owner came and said to him, Sir, did you not sow good seed in your field? Then how is it that we have tares? He answered, just said to them, an enemy has done this. The servant said to him, do you want us to then go and gather these up? And he said, no. Lest we, as we gather out these tares, we uproot the wheat with them. So let both grow together until harvest, and at that time we'll say to the reapers, first gather together the tares, bind them in bundles and burn them, but gather the wheat and put in my barn. So we have that good and the evil, the righteous and the unrighteous, and the darkness and the light. One of the hard things always as we think about the human side is that, brought about, that's mentioned in Matthew 5:45 is that you may be sons of God, gather in heaven. Well, that was a great typing. So you can ignore the first line there. So he makes the sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends the rain on the just and the unjust. That's always a hard thing to really gather sometime, why it is. Bad things happen to good people, and good things happen to bad people, and some of that was known from the very beginning, but as a human and as a man, that's hard to always really digest. So we've got two types of people. So if you've got two types of people, we also have two pathways that we can follow. And we have that path of blessed godliness and righteousness, and then also that path of the ungodly, the unrighteous, sinning, the scornful, the perishing people. And we always have that visual in Matthew 7, in chapter 7, verses 13 and 14 with the gates. So we enter through the narrow gate, enter through the narrow gate. For the gate is wide and the path is broad that leads to destruction. And those who enter by are many. But small is the gate and narrow is the way that leads to life, and only a few will find it. And so doing the PowerPoint was like, oh, this would be a great time to find that great picture of the narrow gate and whatnot. And really did not find one, because the more I pondered what would be a great visual depiction of that, it was hard to put that together, because you're trying to look at a path. Is it guarded? Is it got a fence up on it? What's the wide path look like? Do they run side by side? And what is that supposed to look like? And in my mind, every one of them brought me a new thought. But we think about our narrow path. It's not lined by this curb and gutter that keeps you from getting out of it, or there's not, you think about interstate, and we've got the fence line and the barriers that go between lanes. But what distinguishes our path and that extent of those paths and the direction of that path is the law of God. Those commandments, those prohibitions, the conditions for living are set forth to guide us and bless us along to that happily ever life. And the important part is, through our study, recognizing this outline. And we started that just even with the outlines of the very first outline for that life with Adam and Eve in Genesis 2, that they could eat from every tree of the garden. But they had one condition: don't eat of the tree of good and evil. That was their condition. That was the law. That was their commandment. That was that defining pathway for that narrow. They were given broad ability to enjoy, but they just had this narrow, a small narrow window of what one or two things, that one thing that they were not allowed to do. It's not, and likewise, yeah. then we go the other way and start looking at what that broad one looks like is, well, which direction is it going? Is it up, down, left, right? What's guiding that? What philosophy? What wisdom? And I come up with, seen a couple interesting comparisons of and some definitions of these philosophies. So one of them is the secular humanism. So it's a philosophy of life or stance that embraces human reason, secular ethics, and philosophical naturalism, while specifically rejecting religious dogma and supernaturalism as the basis of morality and decision-making. Which, in smaller words for people like me that don't understand all that vocabulary at the beginning, basically it's a set of beliefs that promotes human values without believing that there's any type of religious doctrine or supernatural ability or gods or anything better than people. Then there's postmodernism, which gets even, I'm not even sure how this one really works, because postmodernism is basically a way of thinking that there is no real truth. It's a philosophy that says absolute truth does not exist. So I'm not really sure how that works to be able to say, well, Gene, you're wrong, I'm wrong, you're not right, I'm not right. So that doesn't make any sense. I mean, that's like saying it doesn't really matter which pedal in the car you push. You know, one's the gas, one's the brake, but not, you know, we don't understand or know or decide that one is or isn't the other. And it's just interesting to think how some of this would survive, but that's also why we see that these philosophies come and go, and we've still seen the continued grace and wisdom of God. So in James 3:15 and through 16, in thinking back on the philosophy of man, the wisdom does not descend from heaven, but is earthly, sensual, and demonic. For where envy and self-seeking exist, confusion and every evil thing are there. But the wisdom that is from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, willing to yield, full of mercy and good fruits, without partiality and without hypocrisy. Which very well describes, beginning to end, Genesis to Revelations, Matthew, all of that. And a stark contrast to these human philosophies. And unfortunately, we are seeing those more and more creep into the Christian philosophy in general, and in churches, and doing this in the general sense of all Christians and all churches together, that this changing of the path, and part of it is doing it in that, especially now as we think about trying not to be divisive or exclusive, being more inclusive, don't want to stand out and be against another subset. And we're seeing that came out with the Pope, and there was an article about several of these large Christian churches, and that came out and were very political in discussing some of these topics that are very politically charged at this time, the same-sex how they were going to deal with same-sex marriage in the church, gender roles, gender identities, and some of those sorts of things, and how, well, we'll include this and different things to make sure that they didn't appear to the world to be not accepting of people, or not thinking that maybe that made them look more Christian than they were. But it even comes down to some things that are even more mundane. One that have seen, and at times still kind of made me wonder, was, and it's even in Churches of Christ, especially as you head further south where there's more of them in a single congregation, where they've moved to having praise bands. So you got a praise band at the 8 o'clock service and the 10 o'clock service. There is one. It's the traditional. So you've divided this congregation into two congregations, but by having two services, you've tried to make it still a single congregation. So some of that philosophy of going, well, what are we doing? So are we really heading down that right path? Or are we, one way, two ways? Which way? And as we're walking along our path, looking to maintain our course, are we looking to those others and saying, hey, come on over to our path, walk with us? But are we trying to widen our path? And just a little bit to allow people to come into your path by not changing or moving things around? That is our truth. That, we've got to think about our philosophies, think about our paths, and realizing that, we have a choice, and God sees it as the godly, the ungodly, the righteous, the unrighteous, and there's two ways that all of this ends. And that's the truth. And the important part is we've been given a great roadmap. It hasn't changed. It's right there freely for study. It's open and available for all of us to read. So the important part for us to find that happily afterlife is for all of us to come together and find pleasure in happiness and in blessings in the law of the Lord. And we do that together, supporting each other, helping each other study, walking alongside each other, encouraging each other as if one of us strays from the path, helping the other ones as they ask, working together. Because through that continuous study, the working together, we will surely enjoy that blessed and glorious, happily ever after life in the kingdom of heaven. So if you're needing the prayers this morning of the church, needing to make changes on your path, or just looking for additional support, welcome to you to come up as we sing together.